to share. Are we on sharing?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can everybody else hear me?
I think everyone can hear you, but they're not able to speak. So I'm speaking on behalf of them. Yes, in the chat we can hear you. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Good morning, those who are on the East Coast. Good night, good evening in Israel and all over Canada. As Mara, I'm here. I'm going to tell my story, which is either rarely told or untold, about the Jews of the Arab land. And I prepared a PowerPoint, and it should last about 30 minutes or 40 minutes, depends upon if you have any questions, in which I will touch briefly about the history of the Jews in Arab land, especially in Iraq. And then I'll slow down about my life and my family life in Iraq, and move on to describe what happened after, and describe what happened to the Jews of the Arab land. So my first slide here, I write, I am a former refugee, because I was a refugee that when I ran out of Iraq, I went from Iraq to Iran in December of 1949, I'm sorry. And from there, I went to Israel. There I became a homeless, penniless refugee for a short while. So that's why I call myself a former refugee. I begin with the story of the destruction of the country of Judah by the king Nebuchadnezzar. Some of you know there was, after the death of the King Solomon and other kings, Israel was split up into two kingdoms, one called in the north called Israel, and the other one in the south called Judah, and Jerusalem was the capital of the country Judah. We don't know what happened to the country of Israel. It was invaded by the Syrian Empire in the year 723 BCE, and they dispersed. But the main thing left was the kingdom of Judah, and which is Jerusalem is the capital. Here's a sketch or table, a painting shows the Jews arriving to Babylonia when King Nebuchadnezzar brought the Jews after breaking the walls of Jerusalem and burning the temple. He brought the Jews to Babylonia as captives to build up his empire. And it's Psalm 137, on the rivers of Babylon, where we sat and cried when we remember Zion. With this, the group they came in, there were a number of prophets to Babylonia. Here's a tomb of Prophet Ezekiel. There's a tomb of Prophet Ezra, Nehemiah. The tomb of Jonah was in the northern Iraq, and Mosul, which was destroyed when ISIS took over in 2014. The 70 years later, after the occupation, after the exile of the Jews from Judea, King Cyrus the Great conquered Babylonia, and he decreed the Jews can go back to Palestine or to Judah to build the second temple. And here is the stone that in his decree in Persian at the time, and I saw that stone in Los Angeles, brought up at the Getty Museum, but I think it its home is in London Museum. Here they show the king and his decree. The return, they built up the second temple that was again destroyed by the Roman Empire in the year 70 EC, CE, after the exile. Is a picture of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by the Roman. During after the destruction of the second temple, the Jews spread. As you can see, this is the east. They went east to Iran and closer to India. Of course, they're in Iraq, Turkey. And you can see a lot of them went to what's now called the Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula. There was a lot of Jews living, in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, in Eden. And then they went to North Africa, Egypt, all the way Algeria, Tangier, and they crossed to Spain. From there, they went up north to other part of Europe. During their period, in the first few centuries, the Jews lived under many rules, including the Greeks, the Assyrian, the Mongols, but they prospered in learning the Torah. There were two cities called Sura and Pumbedita, where the Babylonia became the center of the Jewish faith. Many Jews that spread all over, whether in the East or Europe, they used to consult or send questions to the Jews of Babylonia about religion and faith. Here's the Talmud Babli, which is most commonly known, was written in the 4th and the 5th century in Babylonia. Fast forward, in the 7th century, the Islam invaded the area. The death of Muhammad in the 630 or so, after that, few hundred or few thousand Muslim zealots on horses, camel, and by foot went and conquered and went to spread Islam. Within 1 century, they came in from Saudi Arabia. They spread all this area, went to Iraq, Iran, and the East. They conquered all North Africa, and they spread and they end up in Spain. The famous battle was when they crossed what's called Gibraltar. Actually, Gibraltar is an Arabic word, which means in Arabic, Jabal Tariq, the mountain of Tariq. That's the leader of the expedition that crossed to Europe. And his famous success is he crossed Europe with the army of the young Muslim zealous to conquer, and he burned the boats, and he told them that al-bahru min wara'akum wal-adu min amamakum, that the sea is behind you and the enemy ahead of you, and you have one way. And they conquered and most of Europe, most of Spain. And here's the map of how much they spread in 1 year. In 2 centuries, they spread all the way to the far east. They conquered, went to India, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and they went Indonesia, and they went all the way to China. We go fast forward, and the Ottoman Empire conquered all this area in 1453. They went all again, Iraq was part of it, North Africa, And they conquered Eastern Europe. You could see all this side. This is all Europe. Greece, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and they were stopped at the gates of Vienna. And they were the rulers there till 1917, when the First World War won by the Allies, and they were when they dismantled stayed only Turkey. Here's a picture or a map of how after World War I, the Allies, the British and French, divide the area, and all this was drawn after they conquered the Middle East, and Turkey remained as one country, only Turkey. They lost all its holding, and here shows the map of Iraq in brown. Then they have here, I have here the map of Transjordan and Israel and Palestine. They call this area Palestine. And all the inhabitants of that area became Palestinian, whether Jew, Christian, Muslim, or any nationality. They held up a Palestinian passport, and they had a Palestinian pound, which is equivalent to the British pound. In reward to the Arab helped them to win the war against the Turks. In rewards to their efforts, the British took some princes from Saudi Arabia and became king of one of them in Jordan, King Abdullah here, and King Faisal became the king of Iraq. Here's a picture of the King Faisal the First, and he was so wise, he wanted to build Iraq. So he recognized the Jewish community in Iraq or in Baghdad, which at that time estimated between 30 to 40% of the population. And here is his picture with the Jewish leaders in Baghdad. He was so wise that he went build up the countries. He appointed the first finance minister, Sir Escalating Sassoon, on the third. This is the picture of the king with the beard, and the third one is sitting next to him, Escalating Sassoon. And also there was the senator Menachem Daniel. So it was a prosperity for Iraq. Sir Escalating was famous of building the treasury of Iraq, and his famous deal that he made, he tied up the sale of the Iraqi oil to gold, not only to the British pound. So when the British pound collapsed, so they still got equivalent in gold. And he built up a country, and it was also a renaissance for the Jewish people in Iraq in the 1920s. He was so friendly to the Jewish community. Here is a picture showed him with Chaim Weizmann, the late first president of Israel, and he, which Chaim Weizmann obtained the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which state that Britain will help establish a Jewish home for the Jewish people in Palestine. And here's the King Faisal, a picture with Chaim Weizmann. Unfortunately, he died young, and in 1933, and his son, who was 21 years old then, in 1933, ascended to power, King Ghazi. King Ghazi grew up in a kingdom. He was spoiled. His big number one hobby was racing cars, and he died 6 years later after he's ascended, in a car crash. There's some rumors that the British had something to do with him, but King Ghazi's ascent to power brought a new era to the Jewish community. He was beginning to flirt with Nazism. Adolf Hitler was his ideal, and he published Mein Kampf in Arabic, and the Jewish community began to feel at unease under his rules. But he died in 1939 when he was about 27. Even after his death, Nazism began to flourish. At the time, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was the leader of the Muslims in Palestine, was chased out. Excuse me, I'll take a little bit of water. Am I going too fast?
No, this is great.
Thank you. So, Haj Amin al-Husseini he was instigating to start to establish a pro-Nazi coup in Iraq. Here it shows him with the leaders of the army, and in May 1st, 1941, he succeeded to have a pro-Nazi coup headed by a former Iraqi Prime Minister, Rashid Ali al-Gailani, which is with him here, and chased the king. After Ghazi's death, his son, he was 6 years old, he became the king, and his uncle became the regent. So with the coup here in April 1st of 1941, the King Faisal fled, and the pro-British government fled also with him. At that time, in 1941, the world, the democratic world, was in its worst situation. It was the darkest hour. Hitler had controlled practically all Europe. He had made a deal with Russia when he attacked Poland in 1939 to divide Poland. And so there was no resistance from the Russian against him, although he was anti-communist. So all of Europe, France surrendered after a month or so of the first world with the attack of Nazism. So only left was Britain, and North Africa. The Nazi army under the command of General Rommel arrived to Cairo. They were stopped at 70 miles from Cairo. That was in June of 1941. America was, they didn't want to get involved. There were so many pro-Nazi activists in America. But that time, England was the only standing up to Hitler. And here shows the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem with Hitler in 1941. Once the pro-Nazi government took over Iraq, now anti-Semitism began in the open. Daily newspaper with hate, with poisonous articles about the Jews of the Arab land, the Jews of Iraq, that they are poison to the country, that they are not nationalists, that they are traitors, and slowly they began to arrest people and torture them, admit them that they are pro-British. And it ended up in 2 months later, in June 1st, when the British came in with the new troops from India. The British wanted to to keep Iraq under control. Luckily, because they needed the oil and the route to India. So they brought new, fresh troops from India, and they came to Baghdad. And that happened on May 31st, exactly 2 months after the coup. So on June 1, the pro-Nazi government that controlled Iraq for a couple of months fled. So there was an open vacuum of the British stayed outside Baghdad. So the mobs, and here is a picture of the Farhud, what is called the pogrom, that happened in June 1 and 2nd of 1941. I will translate to you in Arabic. It said, this is a rare picture of the Farhud, the violent disposition in Baghdad in the year 1941, where the Muslim with their daggers and knife and the Jews are held hostages in these hall at the time they were gathering to try to protect themselves. During that period, I'll slow down and talk about it. During that period, the Farhud, mobs went into Jewish quarters, looted homes and businesses, burned homes, and killed men and women, killed men and children, raped women, and it was a great violence there in the history of Baghdad. I was born in that area, Taht al-Takia it's called. I grew up as a child. I grew up as a happy child. But luckily, we moved out from that area a year earlier to a better area in the suburb called Babi Shargi near the Tigris River. But the same day, my brother was riding a bicycle. There was no communication what's happening. My older brother, Eliyahu, 6 years old, went on a bicycle to visit his cousin in the old Jewish quarter. When they arrived, he found both my two uncles' home was empty, looted. They managed to escape from one roof to another with only one injury. My auntie broke a leg. We survived, and he came back on the way back, and he saw on the main street that the mobs was stopping the minibuses and singling the Jewish passengers, robbing them, and stabbed them to death. So needless to say, he came back home traumatized, and we put furniture in front of our house. I was 10 years old. I carried hot water buckets with oil to the roof to boil it just in case of the mob to come in. But needless to say, it was a trauma, a terrible trauma. My father sat and was praying, reading the Psalms and hoping that this thing will come. And this is a picture of the mass grave of the Jews that were buried at that time without ritual in 1941. In June 2nd, the British entered Baghdad, the city of Baghdad, and ordered the calm order, and they killed few of the writers. The Iraqi government estimated 179 Jews, but the truth was more than 1,000, and there were many injured that were taken to the hospital, that were poisoned. Some were thrown in the river, the Tigris River. After the British came in, things went back to normal, So, but at the time of the Farhud, we didn't know where to run. There was no country to take us. Of course, Israel was not established, but after that, when the British came in, put back the order, and we think this is a picture of 3 years later with my family. We were 7 brothers and 1 sister, but in the pictures there are only 6 brothers because Eliyahu was 6 years old, graduated in 1942 and succeeded to go to Palestine to study at the Hebrew University. My older brother here was really the key factor to bring to enrich our family, and he never had education, but I call him, he has a PhD in common sense. He knew how to bribe the authorities to get import license of textiles, and we became suddenly wealthy and like a nouveau rich. Here is my picture. I'm here. My youngest brother Nouri is here. Again, the things began to turn upside down with the United Nations partition of decision, the partition of Palestine in 1947, and demonstration. I was in high school. In the last year of my high school, all the Jewish school was closed. And by the way, the Jews at the time were about maybe 30% of the population of Baghdad. So there were many traders, bankers, engineers, owners. So they were active in every, they run the train, they run the electricity company, the banking. So here's a picture I don't have myself, but we had to walk with to march with them in the demonstration, saying we are against the partition of Palestine, on fear for our lives if we say yes, because the anti-Semitism began in the open. With the war against Israel in 1948, that started May 15th, and the Arab failure, the Iraqi army, together with Egypt, Syria, Transjordan, and Lebanon, failed to destroy Israel. These failure and revenge turned against the Jewish population of Iraq, and then we began. Zionism became a capital punishment, and there was arrest, tortures, and execution. Here, sadly, to see a picture, and they accuse one of the most famous merchant, Shafiq Adas, and this is the court in a two-day trial court, and then he was executed in 1948. And this year, I graduated from high school myself in June of 48, and I got accepted in 3 American universities, including USC, Vermont, and Washington, to come to study. I was dreaming to become a nuclear physicist, but they would not allow me what they call exit visa or khuruj. So as life became intolerable, many of my friends were arrested, and I thought and they would not allow me to leave to study. So I traveled with my younger brother from Baghdad to the port city of Basra, and we went on a riverboat. You see the sketch. I don't have exact picture, but here's a river sketch where the smugglers, a boat didn't have any motor. The smuggler, they carry hay or dates or manure. They made a false room, and 12 of us hid underneath. And it's a sketch of what they went from Basra. We were lucky just to leave at the middle of the night to smuggle out, but unfortunately, the wind were against us. Although this boat moves with the tide. The tide comes from the Persian Gulf and goes back to the Persian Gulf. So we were planning to smuggle to Iran, and it should take about 4 to 5 hours. But because of the wind, we were stopped, and we went into a tributary river, and we stayed there 24 hours. Stayed without, worried how are we going to be discovered. We had no food, But luckily, the day after, at night, the wind and the tide was with us, and the smuggler were able to take us to cross to Iran to be smuggled. That was in December of 1949. By the way, I wrote my memoir. I finished in 2020, where I show all the details of my trip, how I smuggled out. I'll show you in a minute the book. And I stayed a couple of months in Iran helping other smuggled Jews, and the Iranian people were great hosts, took us to their homes, fed us, and from the area of the city called Khorramshahr on the river, they took us to a bigger city, and from there to Tehran, the capital. And the migration, the lift was organized by Alaska Airline. And I arrived to Israel on May 2nd, 1950, as a homeless, penniless refugee. Here's a picture of refugee camp. And when I arrived there, I stayed only a couple of months in the refugee camp. And then I went to a kibbutz. I didn't care for it because I thought my mind stopped to think everything is organized for you. Then I went to work. And in September of 1950, I had to join the compulsory Israeli army, and I was assigned to the Navy. Here's my picture in the Navy, and you could see I was at that time enamored by an actor called Don Amici from Hollywood, who was a thin mustache. So I copied him, and some of you older people remember the movies, and I made I used to have a thin mustache there. In 1951, the Iraqi government, with the cooperation of the American or something, paid the Iraqis to allow the Jews to leave. So the Iraqi government decreed that any Jew who wants to leave could leave Iraq with only one suitcase, as you can see it here, and leaving everything behind. He loses nationality, he cannot come back to Iraq, his asset, his property. So there were in Iraq at the time estimated 135,000 Jews. 95% of them left. They were the smart people, because the 5% that left faced worse after that, who thought that they're going to have an easier life, and they did at the beginning of the 50s and the middle 50s, but then with all the Ba'ath Party and Saddam, they had a terrible life, and I'll show you this. So here's the picture of how they were checked. They brought one suitcase. Of course, they were robbed at the airport by the customs if they have anything valuable. My mother and my older brother left on that, what they call Ezra and Nehemiah. Here they sat at the airport waiting for the plane to come and pick them up to leave to Israel. They were not allowed, the plane were not allowed to go directly to Israel, so they stopped in Cyprus. The 1948 is a map that shows the Jews in the Arab land. In Iraq, there was 135,000, Persia, 100, Egypt, Libya, Algeria. Morocco had the most, 265,000 in 1948. And then, of course, the persecution of the Jews became on the open as different war was waged against Israel, and they lost, particularly in 56, when Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal and blocked the Strait of Tiran, and then the 67 war, and all of them, they were persecuted. So they ran, most of them, they fled, they left their properties and they fled. Yeah. Now we move into the final pictures where it shows the the Jews that lived in the Arab world, in Aden, 8,000, and Algeria was 140. Today there's 0. In Egypt, there are 75. That was in 2016. There was about 15. Then you have, I'm sorry. Then you have Iraq was Iran 100,000. There's still about 5,000 or 6,000 now living in Iran. Iraq, there was 150 estimated. The count does not cure between 135 to 150. Today, there's only 3 left, and they're hiding. They don't know who they are. Lebanon, there were 20,000 is about 20. Libya, there's none. In Morocco, there's still, Morocco is, especially after the Abraham Accord, there's some Jews, they're welcoming Jews the trip, and I hope one day to visit Morocco too. In Syria, there was only 20 left, and Tunisia. And Tunisia, there's still about 1,000 in an island called Jerba. So here, the question is, what happened to them? Where did they go? Because the War of 48 created this Nakba, what the Palestinian called, where the Palestinians fled to Gaza, to the West Bank, which then controlled by the West Bank by Jordan, and the Gaza was controlled by Egypt, and Jews were not allowed to go and visit the city, the old city of Jerusalem or the Western Wall. So most of them, 600 or 650, left to Israel. They all, like me, became refugees, but they didn't stay long. For example, I refused to become a refugee. I served in the army, and after the army, I went to Canada. I migrated hoping to study, but that didn't work out. Then I had to work and got married with 3 kids. So most of them, the other, the balance went all to Europe, to France, to England. Some came to Canada and the United States. They all have to learn a new language. None of them left to another Arab country to speak their mother tongue, Arabic. They have to learn a new culture. And I, like all of them, grateful to be absorbed and to be taken as whether in Israel, and a Canadian, I became a Canadian. And then I moved to the United States in 1978, 45 years ago, and to be absorbed to be part of the United States. I moved to Los Angeles with 3 kids, although my dreams of education was broken among many other dreams that I couldn't reach. But my children, I have 2 PhDs and 1 MD. So my dreams of education has really been fulfilled with my children. They're all financially independent, and I'm truly happy and to be grateful to be living in the United States. Then I didn't talk with my children and family till I was about 77, when I joined the memoir writing classes in Santa Monica College, the emeritus. And once I wrote about my escape, the first time I wrote, I was crying right through. And those was bittersweet tear, that the pain I kept within me that I didn't share, and the joy that I left. And in 2020, I finished my book, the Beyond the Rivers of Babylon, that I published. It was published during the COVID, so I didn't have any book tour. But my biggest ambition now, as I'm in the final stages, to translate my book into Arabic for the Arab people to read our stories. I found I had somebody to help me in Iraq, a Muslim, which really a kind person that it helped me translation. I will close with two short stories. With the Farhud, when things were happening at worst time about killing of the Jews, as I said, my father was sitting and praying. And then I heard stories about Muslims protecting Jews during the time of the Farhud, or that pogrom. They stood in front of their homes. They took their home and protected them. And my father, as an importer of textile, has many good Muslim customers. I never talk any bad about Muslims. So at the age of 10, 11, I was confused. I said, how could it be that Muslim did this and Muslim doing that? So he said, my son, don't judge all group at the same time. Judge people with their behavior. There are good Muslims and bad Muslims. There are good Jews and bad Jews, good Christians and bad Christian. And that was a lesson with me that I kept to value, appreciate and value people for their behavior, not with their faith. And the second story I'd like to share with you, that when I came to Los Angeles, I joined a synagogue called Kahal Joseph, mostly immigrant from Iraqi or Sephardic background from India. That Iraqis, they went to India, to Singapore, to Burma, and some came from Israel. So I knew a fellow similar with my story. He said he escaped to Israel, and we were very friendly for years. So when I told my story of my escape and our boat got stuck in the river, he suddenly stood up. He said, I was the 13 years old boy in that boat at the night. He was with us on that boat. And it's for me, it was a miracle. I was crying when he said, his name is Hasqel Abrahami, and he was with us in the escape boat that I showed you. He was the youngest of the teenager. He was 13 years old boy. And with this, I conclude my talk, and I would leave it for you to for any questions. If anything I omitted or escaped or you wanted to expand on, I'll be happy to share with you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. This was incredible. We're getting lots of comments in the chat of just gratitude for you sharing your story. Why don't we close the PowerPoint for now so we can see you a little bit more clearly while we ask questions. Great. Thank you.
Wonderful.
I was going to read questions from the chat, but I see that Bob from Baltimore has his hand raised, and so we'll start there, and then we can ask some questions from the chat. Bob, please ask a question. That ends in a question mark.
Unmute himself, huh?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you very much, Joseph. When the Iraqi Jews left, like you, and went to Iran. In Iran, were you helped by simple Iranians, or just general Iranians, or just Jewish Iranians?
It was mostly Jewish Iranian, but I must comment also about the government. The government was really at that time pro-Israel. In 1948, the Shah already established relationship with Israel, so they were in the open. The government supported, instructed all the police not to harass us, and so we were walking on the streets, and the help that we got directly from the Jewish community, I would say, generally, but the pro-Israel government was a great help. Some of us ran through the south from Basra. Some went to north to Kurdistan. The Kurdish in northern Iraq was and they still are the best friend of the Jews. My father, after I escaped and my mother left, my father and my older brother, that I call the has a PhD in common sense. They stayed there, and they had some money, but they were able to try to smuggle out this money through what they call hawala. Hawala means that you give your money to somebody in Iraq, and he give you a code. When you are out of the country, you present the code to somebody else, and he will give you back the money. But of course, you give the money in the black market. If 1 dinar equal to a pound, maybe 2 or 3 dinars equal to the pound. And they had a hefty commission they took to do that. And above that is to trust them, to give them the money, because you are out. Do you know, are you going to pay it all together? So luckily, my parents my father and my older brother were able to smuggle some money. But most of them, they just left without nothing. You know, most of the Jews left nothing. And to give me another minute to share with you what's left of them, the 5%, there was a coup in Iraq again in 58. They killed the king and the prime minister, Nur Saeed, the pro-British. Then another coup killed the coup leaders, and then they finally ended up with the Ba'ath party, and then Saddam. So in 67, after the failure of the Arab to conquer, as Nasser was bragging that he is going to throw the Jews to the Jews' blood will go to the sea, the Iraqi government accused some, and they had a public hanging in January of 69 of 9 Jews. That was a day of celebration. 500,000 they participated, dancing, and they're selling kebab and picnicking. It was a tragedy. And slowly these 5% left. And today there's only 3 people left. So it was a miserable time for them. I hope I answered your question.
We're getting lots of questions in, and I will say we're not going to be able to answer everyone's questions, but we can turn it over to Karen. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and we'll see how many more questions we can fit in. Karen, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your most incredible story, your journey of you and your family and the people. I really appreciate it. I'm very moved by this. I have a specific question to ask you, and that's if after, in hindsight, if you ever thought that it was no coincidence that you were assigned to serve in the Israeli Navy, given your unforgettable 24-hour survival experience on the escape boat from Iraq to Iran.
Yeah, I mean, give me emotion. I feel emotional. Forgive me. Yeah, so I think it was pure luck that I asked to be in the Navy because my aunt was living in Haifa. My aunt with her husband from Baghdad. He moved back in 1933. He was a merchant importing crockery. And then he was threatened by one of his customers, so they left. So when I arrived, I went into what they called Sha'ar Aliyah. When all of the Jews, they came in, they sprayed us with DDT. And we stayed 3 days, and then we went to the refugee camps. And from there, they were assigned us where to try to find work. But I worked from one work to another. I all describe it in my book. And then I joined the Navy. I joined the Navy, the Israeli army in September. It was 2 years. And I thought, man, when I finish, I can go to university. They wouldn't allow the young people like me in good health to go to university to study because they needed soldier to defend Israel. And Israel, within the next few years, doubles its population. When they started, there was estimated 650. They became about 1,200,000 or 1,250,000. So, I applied, and I was fortunate to be in the Navy close to my aunt in Haifa. And I'm happy that I was in the Navy. And at that time, it was nothing. There are two ships, that cargo ship that Israelis bought from Canada, and they installed a couple of guns on them. And that was the beginning of the Israeli Navy. So I was just fortunate to be in there. Thank you.
Jacqueline?
Thank you. I hear that Iraqi Jews who have lived in Israel for quite a while still have a certain attachment to their culture, to their Iraqi culture. And I've seen like concerts from, the wonderful oud player, Yair Dalal,
Well, personally.
Really? So could you comment on that?
Yes,
This attachment.
I mean, you grew up for generations and centuries, we were there for 25 centuries in Iraq, and you grew up after the invasion of Islam in the 7th century. Jews at that time spoke Aramaic. They prospered as I said, in the Torah learning, but two centuries after, they became Arabatized. They spoke Arabic. They lived Arabic. I was born. My mother tongue was Arabic, and the Jews had their own dialect. They called Judeo-Arabic dialect. And of course, you grow up with the food, with the music. The music was dominant by the Jews.
Right.
The best band was a Jewish band that was always invited to the palace, and they wrote music, they played music. So some, they stayed with it with their families. So some still they have with the food, especially. We still Iraqi food sometimes. My wife was born in India to Iraqi family. We still have the kubba, the okra, and the different foods. So it's not easy, but nearly all of the younger generations are, disconnecting. But yeah, this Yair Dalal is a remarkable person, and he took the Arabic. The Arabic music is very rich. By the way, the Arabic language is very rich also. And versus the Hebrew. Hebrew was dormant for 2,000 years, so it didn't expand. But the Arabic language, the poetry and the words, it's amazing. So some grew up in this culture. For me, it was different on a personal level. Once I moved to a country, I become part of it. My kids are American. They live in America. When we were in Canada, we were Canadian. But you just divorce your culture so easily. So I know there's a big museum in Or Yehuda called the Babylonian Center. If you are ever in Israel, I highly recommend to see it. My book is there, and the story of the Jews, the immigration, and of the history of the Jews. So, it's natural in the blood. You like to continue with the music. You live every day around you, the Arab music there. So that's mine. So I still listen to Arabic music myself. Thank you, Jacqueline.
We have so many great questions, and I know we have a few more people with their hands raised, but
I don't mind staying a bit later if you want to
Thank you. I think we'll put your email and your website so people can continue the conversation, because we could go for hours and hours. But we had a few questions in the chat about the Iraqi Jewish community that you found in Israel, in Canada, in California. Was there a community there? Is there a diaspora? Or do you feel like it was more spread out and you have to put a lot of effort into keeping up these traditions?
Yes, in some areas, Mara, in some areas they were more closer with each other. For example, there's a very, very well-knitted community in Montreal, Canada, where I spent 22 years. Some of them came directly from Iraq to Canada. So they brought their own culture with them, their parents, with their backgrounds. There is an Iraqi community in England that is very, very, very close to each other. And in Los Angeles, there's, because of the spread of the city, so many millions, the areas. So it's not as easy to connect with each other. But we're still, because Polish Jews, they speak Polish and they like to get together with their friends.
Unknown?
Yeah, I just got it. Yeah. So they we still get together in the synagogue. Last night I had a book signing by Joseph Sassoon, who's wrote about his family, fled Baghdad back in the 29, 31, and they built a big empire in India and China. They traded with cotton and at that time heroin, and he had shipping. So we still connect. You hear somebody from your hometown, if you're in a country, you still have a feeling thanks to it. So there are some nice, good communities. Yes, Mara.
Thank you so much. For everyone who's asking, I just added Joseph's email and website into the chat. This also is being recorded, so we will send it out to all of you. I know for me personally, an hour wasn't enough, but I think we're very grateful for your time, Joseph. And
you have some hand signing. Maybe you could get one of them or two.
Okay, we'll sneak in one more. Miriam.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you, Joey. It's so heartfelt. Thank you so much for your story. And I just wanted to know quickly, I don't want to take too much time, if we can stay together as a group and share our stories somehow. And I've always had a dream to go to, my father's journey went from Iraq to Burma, from Burma to India, from India to England. If there's any chance for at some time, we might be able to get a group of people that might want to go to visit these places and to go and find the cemeteries and to learn more, and actually maybe go one day to learn more.
Thank you, Miriam.
Question to you, Mara, not to me. Yeah, we have a lot of Jews, Iraqi Jews from Burma, from Singapore, from all over India. As I said, my wife was born in Bombay. Yes, I think it's a great idea. I would love to join too.
Just a thought.
I appreciate your thought. It's possible we'll create a story time for people to share their histories and learn from each other. So thank you for the suggestion. And I know that Joseph's story was quite inspiring to all of us. So thank you all. And on that note, we're ending right on time. Joseph, thank you so much. And we'll see you all for our next tour. Bye-bye.
Well, it's my honor and pleasure for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.